Last week on 101 East, artists claim Australia's visual arts industry is under siege from China.
I simply just do not have exhibition here. A lot of people are afraid of China's pressure.
Literally, they are extending the censorship to here, to me, towards me.
It's extremely concerning. This is not just a matter about a few people's careers. This is a matter of democracy and sovereignty for Australia too.
Now, insiders from one of Australia's musical icons air their concerns.
One has heard plenty of stories of being told to program a certain artist. To be very blunt, we're talking about artists from China.
China will definitely be very interested in a big organisation like the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra.
In the second of this two-part series, 101 East investigates suggestions of China's influence over one of Australia's leading publicly funded orchestras.
Meet David Lee, the chairman of one of Australia's most significant cultural institutions, the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, or MSO. Having come to Australia from China on a music scholarship in the late 1980s, he's now a businessman and philanthropist. Playing at the launch of a new research clinic attached to one of the country's leading universities, his generous donations have been rewarded with honorary degrees, his name on a building.
None of this would have been possible if it had not been for David and Angela Lee.
And a prestigious Order of Australia for service to the performing arts. But it's the programs he's introduced to the MSO's repertoire that are becoming a cause for public disquiet. Tonight, he's heading to the MSO's Chinese New Year concert, arriving just in time to greet the Chinese ambassador. The annual event was initiated by David Lee a decade ago and is sponsored by China's consulate and its Ministry of Culture and Tourism, an arm of its propaganda department. Chinese media are allowed in, but we're not.
David Lee, chairman of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra in Australia.
This state news agency video celebrates the concert and David Lee's contribution.
As the nation's first professional orchestra, the MSO presented the annual Chinese New Year concert in 2013 as part of the East Meets West program, in which Lee played an important role.
I believe music is a universal language. We try to bring the people together, and we can build up the relationship between the two countries.
It's a sentiment he and the MSO express often.
MSO built a bridge of the culture exchange and demonstrate Australia is a multicultural society.
And it's one that motivated Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to join as a sponsor 2 years ago. But for world-renowned Chinese Communist Party expert Anne-Marie Brady, the language should be treated with scepticism.
Building bridges is a CCP phrase, so it sounds nice, but only certain people can get on this bridge. No dissidents allowed on the bridge between Australia and China.
And the professor at New Zealand's University of Canterbury says the same is true for the concept of Chinese New Year.
Chinese New Year is just a terminology that the CCP has come up with. It's exclusive, it's not inclusive. And our governments understood that and have corrected the usage to say Lunar New Year, recognising that that term includes all the communities and is not adopting a CCP terminology that's being used to try and control culture.
The Chinese government wants the Chinese community to speak in one voice to promote the Chinese Communist Party. So that made China's propaganda quite different from soft power from other countries.
China researcher and former advisor to the Australian government on relations with China, Catherine Wai-Ling-Yung, also raises concerns about the MSO's Chinese New Year concerts that began just a year after Xi Jinping became president.
Since Xi Jinping came to power, he has on many occasions book about how overseas Chinese play an irreplaceable role in China's rise as a world power. To make connection with the Chinese diaspora, China started to send cultural troops in 2013 to other parts of the world to organize Chinese New Year celebrations.
And harnessing the Chinese diaspora for propaganda purposes at home and abroad is a key function of China's now infamous United Front Work Department.
It is quite well known now that the United Front Work Department play a very major role in foreign interference.
In fact, it was one of the main reasons Australia introduced foreign influence transparency laws in 2018 under then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull.
The most active state and political party seeking to influence public affairs in Australia is that of China. The United Front Work Department is an agency of the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping has described it as the magic weapon.
The fact that the MSO's inaugural New Year concert received endorsement from a peak United Front body, the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, caught Jung's attention.
Being listed and amplified on the United Front website is something that, is worth noticing.
And the MSO's East Meets West slogan also appears closely aligned with the United Front, according to Jung.
The fact that the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra is organising an event that was parallel to United Front Work Department's events should be a worry in Australia, given the fact that United Front Work Department is actually an agent for foreign interference.
The MSO didn't respond to our questions about possible CCP and United Front influences. But in a statement to 101 East, it says it's proud of its leadership in building a multicultural organisation that builds on diversity and international collaborations. Established in 1906, the MSO is publicly funded, receiving between $10 and $15 million annually from Australian governments. Its patrons are a who's who of Australia's influential social and business elite. Its chairman, David Lee, appears to enjoy a close relationship with Chinese diplomatic officials. In various biographies and articles, he says that before coming to Australia, he was a famous violinist in China who played with an orchestra. But there are other parts of his past that he doesn't disclose. Catherine Jung discovered an article that reveals he was a member of a People's Liberation Air Force art troupe from 1971, and that his service extended beyond being a musician.
He was actually serving actively as military personnel within the People's Liberation Army's Air Force. His association with the PLA seemed never to have surfaced in any of his biographies that he used in Australia.
And neither has his membership of the Communist Youth League, an arm of the CCP, which is also mentioned in the article. For Jung, all of this is significant, given Lee's chairmanship of the MSO.
The organisation would go out and lobby for donations or recognitions. And I think people that David Lee dealt with, politicians or government department, have a right to know about his past, particularly if he's related to the People's Liberation Army.
For a year, 101 East has sought to talk with David Lee, but while he's done interviews with Chinese state-aligned media, he's repeatedly refused to speak with us. But we have spoken to more than a dozen current and former members of the orchestra, the board and management, who raise serious concerns about the organisation's lack of transparency that extends to David Lee. Most are too afraid or hamstrung by non-disclosure agreements to talk on the record, but 4 have agreed. To protect their identities, we've used actors to recreate their interviews.
The culture is without doubt toxic.
Toxic is really the word. The environment that has been created by the leadership has meant that people live in fear.
People are very anxious about speaking up. They've seen others get reprimanded and humiliated for making comments and asking questions. There's a lot of secrecy.
The MSO failed to answer our questions as to what it knew about its chairman's PLA history, but MSO insiders appear to not have been told about it.
This is a surprise for me. No, that never came up.
And they're perplexed by David Lee's influence beyond his board position.
I can say beyond a doubt that the Chinese New Year concert and/or the Chinese-based projects of the MSO are completely organised by David Lee.
This MSO Chinese New Year promotional video pays tribute to him.
It was done in conjunction with a great friend of the MSO, David Lee.
He was very, very hands-on with the tickets. He had dozens of envelopes with tickets and scribbles on the back of them as to who they were meant to go to. For someone of his board member prowess and high up in the Asian business world, it seemed weird.
And for this MSO insider, so too was the engagement of a Chinese-Australian media and marketing company to help with ticket sales. Unbeknownst to the insider, OzFocus appears to share a close relationship with the Chinese consulate and seemingly has United Front connections.
We were told essentially that the Chinese community were not necessarily comfortable with big Western organisations, that there would be a lot more trust in a Chinese company. The whole thing was strange.
We asked David Lee about OzFocus, but he didn't answer. Another unusual occurrence was the selection of David Lee's wife, Angela, to play with the orchestra.
Hi, my name is Angela Lee. I am a pianist. I started piano when I was age 4.
In her biography, Angela Lee tells of having come to Australia in 1990 to study piano. But there's little evidence she had a successful career as a soloist prior to her husband joining the MSO board, much to the dismay of musicians and staff.
She's a fine pianist, but she's a fine amateur pianist. There are a number of staff members at the MSO who are exceptional artists, composers, musicians, performers, but they don't put themselves forward to be soloists on the main stage of one of the finest orchestras in Australia and set themselves up alongside the top musicians in the world.
101 East understands that the Players Committee, elected by the orchestra, has made numerous complaints about Angela Lee's engagement since her first appearance under the MSO banner in 2019.
A year later, they turned around and promoted her again for another concert, much to the annoyance of most of the orchestra. And when someone raised it, they were dressed down for bringing up a sensitive topic.
In 2023, Angela Lee performed yet again in the 10th annual New Year concert, despite further protests to management. The committee writing,
"We understand that our chairman is paying for much of the cost of putting the concert on. However, this should not entitle him to hire Miss Lee without further consultation of the artistic committee. Please note there was no consultation. We believe there are a substantial number of soloists who would fulfil the artistic and cultural brief in a more ethical and transparent way."
The complaint and our inquiry about it were met with silence from the MSO, but its statement says Angela Lee was engaged in the same manner as all MSO contracted artists, but chose not to accept a fee for her services. MSO insiders say a lack of consultation and transparency goes beyond the hiring of David Lee's wife.
One has heard plenty of stories of the programming team being told they need to program a certain artist from China, whom David Lee has often suggested. David is connected, which has been a fantastic asset potentially. But then when these artists are given certain opportunities that they may or may not otherwise have had, well, that's the grey area. And that's where it starts to become really uncomfortable.
China-based violinist Lucy Ching is one of David Lee's recruits, debuting with the orchestra in the 2014 inaugural Chinese New Year concert. The MSO normally uses symphony services to arrange travel and visas for foreign artists, but when Lu came to record with the MSO in 2017, David Lee took charge, the violinist getting a non-work visa online.
We think that everything is okay, and then we found out that he was coming with no work permit for a recording for which he's going to be paid. This is very bad because the organisation can lose their possibility to engage people for work purposes.
The MSO insider says a quick decision was made not to pay Liu the recording fee of $7,500 negotiated by David Lee, but instead include a royalty buyout in his next year's contract for performances with the MSO during its tour to China.
At least there was no money trail related to that recording ever being made. So that's what we in the end did.
And internal MSO emails seen by 101 East show that David Lee donated about $40,000 for the recording and also arranged Lucy Ching's contract for 5 performances in China worth around $45,000.
How unusual is it for a board member to negotiate the contract?
This does not happen in the real world, I can tell you.
2 years later, Lucy Ching was elevated to the position of MSO Artistic Ambassador. But it's the violinist's deep connections to the United Front Work Department that Catherine Jung's uncovered that has her worried.
He is an executive member of the All China Youth Federation, and this is one of the also main United Front organizations. He's taken part in a large number of propaganda events going back to the 1990s up till now. For any public institute in Australia, that will be a huge reputational risk. I don't seem to recall there are any disclosure of his United Front positions in any of the literature from the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra.
Australia has a Foreign Agents Registration Act, so if people are affiliated with organisations or agencies that are believed to be part of an influence activity from another government, then they are supposed to report that for good reason.
In 2023, former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull aired his frustration at a general lack of reporting.
There is apparently no organisation in Australia that has any association with the United Front Work Department of the Communist Party of China. Now, I would love to think that was true, but regrettably, I can say absolutely that it is not true. We know what's happening, and we just want people to be open about it, that's all.
But it's Lucy Ching's participation in CCP concerts celebrating the return of Hong Kong and Macau to China that is particularly unnerving for Jung, who was born in Hong Kong.
We have a very large diaspora from Hong Kong in Australia. So I don't know how would I think about the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra inviting musicians that's closely linked and promote a concept that Hong Kong people is trying to resist.
Having a focus of cultural activities from the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, which are promoting this anodyne version of Chinese society, is such a disconnect from the reality. Are they doing concerts to support Hong Kong or support the Uyghurs or celebrate Uyghur culture?
United Front Work Department relations with the MSO go even further. Jung has found that at least 3 of the Chinese-Australian companies that sponsor the East Meets West series are also closely affiliated with the United Front.
The issue is that Melbourne Symphony Orchestra shouldn't have accepted donations from that particular network. It's just legitimizing them. The most important thing is not to allow them to exert influence on our organizations. The Melbourne Symphony Orchestra is very much an icon in Australia, and through them, influencing other people in society, including business leaders and government leaders as well.
The MSO didn't comment on its sponsors' United Front connections, but says in a statement that sponsor support is not an endorsement by the MSO of anyone's private or business affairs. The 3 sponsors have also had run-ins with authorities. In 2019, Ozstar's chairman was banned for 2 years as an immigration agent in New Zealand for serious violations of professional codes. Also in 2019, Heng Yi's owner, Min Wang, had her assets frozen by a court for almost a year after the Australian Tax Office alleged she owed it more than $70 million and presented evidence she'd made false statements about her assets and interests in China. In 2023, one of the founders of R&F Property pleaded guilty to bribing a California governor.
It does seem like an unusual gathering of disreputable figures. This is about reputational risk for Australian cultural organisations by being associated with these kind of organisations, and then the political culture that they're bringing with them from a very authoritarian and oppressive society, which is China today.
And Anne-Marie Brady believes that's a reason it's incumbent on David Lee to declare his past in a PLA music troupe.
His role was as a party propagandist. The PLA is the party's army. And so if he's leading a major cultural institution in Australia and running events that are parroting CCP terminology, and it's not being transparent about the past, that is problematic, but also seemingly implementing cultural policies that the CCP would want is further a concern.
David Lee didn't respond to our questions about his PLA past or whether the MSO is being influenced by the Chinese government. But a statement from his spokesperson says David Lee is a prominent Australian who has contributed greatly to the arts, medical research and education.
David Lee's MSO biography describes him as a market leader in building materials manufacturing, a property developer and investor. Beyond this, information is scant. His companies have no online presence except for a bathroom supply business with a poor customer rating. 2 of his companies were until late 2022 majority owned by an offshore shell company. On Australian company documents, it has a Hong Kong address, but it's not registered there and its beneficial owners are unknown. From 2013 to 2018, at least $14 million flowed in unsecured loans from it to Lee's Australian companies, seemingly to assist with the purchase of property, including this building, which was bought in 2012 for more than $29 million. This recently completed apartment complex appears to be his only original development. MSO insiders just know David Lee to be rich.
We all know that his personal assets at face value are considerable. Nice home, nice car. When he takes people out and so on, he's able to lavish them. The lifestyle.
And it's a lifestyle that sees Lee and his wife mixing in high-powered circles, including with senior politicians, governor-generals and state governors.
I'm very proud to congratulate our dear friend and supporter, Professor Margaret Gardner AC, was appointed to be our next governor of Victoria.
Like many we approached who know David Lee, the now Victorian governor was not available for an interview. In June, China's Premier Li Qiang visited Australia, announcing 2 new pandas for a city zoo and signing a raft of new cooperation agreements, including cultural ones. In the press corps at Parliament House was Chinese-Australian journalist Cheng Lei, who was imprisoned in China for 3 years on espionage charges. Chinese officials brazenly tried to block cameras filming her. While Australian citizen Yang Hengjun remains incarcerated in China after being handed a suspended death sentence for espionage, at the MSO, under David Lee's chairmanship and with Australian government funding, building bridges through music continues to be top of the agenda.
The Chinese Communist Party have been very smart to know that through culture and through art, they can push the perception of China that they want people to receive. In my encountering with Australian organisations, the majority are quite naive. We're buying into quite a large number of Chinese propaganda without questioning. For Australia and for the public, particularly the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra's patrons, there are many questions that needs answering.